Hey guys, it's Ryan with Fluid Health, bringing you another episode of Science-Powered Fitness, and today we're going to talk about postural biases. What is a postural bias? Ultimately, what we want to know is that the optimal posture of the human body is basically maintained by what's called biotensegrity, which is the tensional balance between the muscles, maintaining certain joint orientations. So the body is measured based on where the relative position of the joint structure is based on your center of gravity. And that's, again, basically the middle of your body at the sacrum. So we were measuring the actual angle or rotational element of the body parts relative to where that center of gravity sits. So what we have is a vertical imaginary line where we stack these joint contractures on top of each other. And if everything lines up in an appropriate way relative to healthy populations, well, we say that you have good posture. Again, this is a dynamic process as your body's constantly trying to find tension balance to keep you upright. But when we have instability or we have overuse issues or potentially injuries or structural limitations, because maybe we just were born with a scoliosis issue or a leg length discrepancy, some things are outside of our control, but a lot of it is inside of our control. So what we want to do is just draw your attention to some common postural biases that most people have, and then there are strategies that you can use to restore these things by understanding how to sequence efficiently with essentially anticipatory cues, so how your body will contract certain muscles in a pattern or sequence, and that's called proximal to distal biomechanics. So if you practice these anticipatory cues and recruit the muscles appropriately, then you can establish better posture or center of gravity. And that's, again, just essentially being able to maintain the right tension balance between the muscle groups to stack your body weight on top of your feet. So the issues that we have here typically for postural biases is a forward head posture. That's a common one. Again, that means you have a loss of lordosis of the neck, and oftentimes it's accompanied by a hyperlordotic portion of your C1, C3. And that just means you have too much of an anterior curve forward of your plumb line, and the head is jutting forward. That's normally associated with hyperkyphosis, and that's the curve of the spine that goes posterior of your center of gravity. So your thorax is hyperkyphotic normally if you have a forward head posture. That, again, has to do with altered breathing patterns, the inability to get expansion into your trunk, and, again, immobility in the portions of the trunk that are keeping your body tipped forward. So next one would be an anterior pelvic tilt, and that just means that the hips tip down too far forward. That traditionally means you have abdominal distension and you're falling into what's called a lower cross imbalance. So the hip flexors are typically too tight, the back extensors typically too tight, and again, diaphragm a little bit hyperactive. So the abdominals distend, the hips tip down, and we have a shortening of the quads and a lengthening of the hamstrings and the glutes. So typically hyperlordosis is a common postural imbalance. Then we have a flat back posture, and that's a reduction of the lordotic curve. So that means you've reduced your lumbar curve. It's actually starting to flex over, become more kyphotic, again, behind the body's center of gravity. And again, that's normally associated with weakened hip flexors, potentially overactive abdominals, again, underactive back extensors, and then overactive hamstrings and glutes. So again, we'll see that in people who have basically maybe hurt their back, or they're very dominant in their hamstrings and glutes. But ultimately, this is typically a progression in distortion from hyperlordosis. So you normally gravitate towards that as you get older and you start to see functional deficits. And then finally, we have a scoliosis, and this could be from a leg length discrepancy or pelvic obliquity. And again, that could be from overuse. So it can be a functional leg length discrepancy. If we overuse, the load-bearing muscles on one side of the body can hike the hip up on that side. So we're going to see, again, a lateral compression of the spine and a shifting or obliquity of the pelvis, and that can load one side of the body disproportionately. So typical postural imbalances when we train, we try to get these guys under control, get a neutral spinal alignment, which is essentially the stacking of the spinal column so that they maintain their neutral arcs. You got an anterior, posterior arcing, and again, you have A curves and P curves, and they have to be in balance between the extensors and flexors, and again, the inner unit and outer unit musculature. So all that stabilizes these positions so that we can optimize weight transfer and, again, power transfer into the limbs. So if we're having issues with this, got to start there before we start working on sport-specific things. So questions on this, guys, remember, reach out to us, admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. This is the beginning, guys, of understanding how to move efficiently. If we have postural imbalances, it's going to show up as movement instability, and then that's where we start to see things go wrong. So make sure to focus in on those things first. Talk to you soon.